Magandang araw and welcome po sa pagpapatuloy po ng ating pong study on the Bible Jesus Read, a study of the Old Testament based on the book by Philip Yancey. Ang ating pong session po ngayon is on Ecclesiastes, the end of wisdom. Kung nabasa niyo na, kung hindi niyo pa po nababasa ang Ecclesiastes 1 to 12, i-pause niyo po muna ang video po nito before proceeding with this video session. Pero kung nabasa niyo na po ang ating pong reading assignment on the book of Ecclesiastes, magpatuloy po tayo sa ating pong pag-aaral for this session. So, for this session, titignan po natin yung ating pong history and background of the book of Ecclesiastes. Yung pong title ay nagmumula sa Latin Vulgate na Liber Ecclesiastes, which in turn refers to the title or designation of the book's primary speaker. Yung pong nagsasalita throughout the text, which in Greek is referred to as Ecclesiastes or in Hebrew as Kohelet. Sana po tama po yung banggit ko po nito. Yung pong Hebrew na term is in reference to the term for an assembly, which is kahal. So, it appears to be yung primary setting ng book. Kaya po yung translation po nitong Kohelet, Kohelet is the preacher, or kung saan po nadederive po natin yung pong term na Ecclesiastes as teacher. Sino po ang author po nito? Ang anonymous author po nito is most of the time referred to as Solomon, dahil po dun sa mga attributes po na mababasa po sa chapter 1 verse 1. However, the phrase son of David historically has been used to refer to any legitimate Davidic descendant. So, kung titingnan po natin ang history ng Israel, any king descended from David can be referred to as a son of David. And there are actually several candidate kings fitting yung profile nito pong preacher. However, other proposals for similar candidates for the identity of the preacher have encountered difficulty kasi ito pong time po ni Solomon yung pinaka-prosperous, and yun po yung time na yung hari si Solomon achieved such great fame and wisdom. So, ang prime factor po that puts into doubt yung Solomon as being the author of Ecclesiastes and as being the preacher, yung kanya pong decline into blind idolatry. So, yun po yung medyo nagdi-disqualify sa kanya kung siya nga ba talaga ang nagsulat nitong Ecclesiastes. There's also the possibility of the author not necessarily being a king, but a wise teacher who adopts Solomon's character. So, ito po yung interpretation naman po ni Philip Yancey. When was this written? Or ano pong setting po nito? Yung pong distinct na Hebrew language that was used throughout the book supports the idea that Ecclesiastes was written well after the time of Solomon, around the 10th century BC. But there is also the possibility that the language may have been modernized from the time it was first published. The book setting also hints at a time similar to the peak of the Solomonic era. So, isang mababasa po natin sa Ecclesiastes that this is a time of immense wealth and prosperity, and yet it was also filled with injustice and oppression. So, ang possible na time frame po ng pagsulat po nitong Book of Ecclesiastes, given the length of the reign of the Davidic dynasty, Ecclesiastes may have been written anytime between the time of Solomon until shortly before the fall of Judah, nung ito po ay dinala into exile. So, anytime between 971 BC to 586 BC. Bakit po importante na malaman po natin itong information po nito? Even before Jesus referred to himself as the Good Shepherd, mababasa po natin sa text ng Ecclesiastes that the author refers to God as the one shepherd who is the source of all wisdom. Makikita po natin yan sa Ecclesiastes 12 verse 11. And in his teachings on worry, Jesus specifically pointed out Solomon as an example of vanity. So, may hint dito na Jesus is familiar with Ecclesiastes. Kaya sinasabi niya na Solomon in all his vanity. Diba? Nakikita po natin yung connection. Jesus presented himself to the people as one with more authority than any rabbi of his day, as the source of wisdom, and as a good shepherd willing to lay his life down for the sheep. So ito po, drawing from the lessons of Ecclesiastes, ito po ang presentations ni Jesus about himself. It is also interesting to note sa sulat po ni Paul sa Romans, yung pong phrase po na when he refers to creation being subjected to futility, ang Greek word na ginamit po niya sa phrase po na ito, mataiotes, is the same word utilized 38 times in the 70 version of Ecclesiastes to render the word vanity or hebet in Hebrew. So Ecclesiastes may have helped form the background to Paul's thought, especially dito po sa Romans 8 verse 18. Ilang po mga observations po natin makikita po dito. The Hebrew term hebel, translated as vanity or vain, appears more than 30 times throughout Ecclesiastes. Ang ibig sabihin po ng hebel, it literally refers to a mist, a vapor, parang hininga na hindi mo makukuha, hindi mo mailalagay sa isang bote. Yung liberal sprinkling of hebel na mababasa natin as meaningless in other contemporary versions, it gives the book an air of pessimism. Parang napaka-nega naman ng book of Ecclesiastes. And it creates a tension with the prosperous era in which it was most likely written. So parang ang unlad-unlad ng setting ng Ecclesiastes, pero napaka-nega ng tema niya. There is a conflict between these things. Although Ecclesiastes is classified as wisdom literature, it is written differently from other books as it does not resemble a collection of proverbs. So, isa po siyang combination ng elements of proverbs and poetry para maikwento po yung storya nung author, yung kanyang quest to find meaning in life. Gumagamit din yung preacher ng mga everyday images like eating, drinking, work, death, and life para mag-create ng isang comprehensive portrait dito po sa kanyang book. Like any contemporary painter, the preacher concedes that he is unable to capture the very essence of life. So, gaya ng isang painter na tinatry na kunin yung essence ng life sa isang painting, hindi mo ma-justify or sa isang picture, hindi po ba? So, parang ganun po yung preacher na, okay, I give up. And the very best way to understand the meaning of life is magtiwala to God, the creator of life himself. So, tingnan lang po natin sandali yung pong outline po niya, yung may introduction po siya sa chapter 1, and then the first catalog of vanities, vanity of the natural world, vanity of wisdom, ganyan, vanity of labor, and then suddenly in chapter 3, biglang naging poetic po yung preacher, sinabi niya there is a time for everything, and then fear God who is sovereign. And then after this chapter, biglang meron pang pahabol, second catalog of vanities. Para saan pa ba itong buhay nito? Para saan pa ang pagtatrabaho? Para saan pa ang wisdom? And then, makikita rin po natin that the preacher talks about injustice, greed versus contentment, and traces the heart of the problem to sin. Dito po sa Ecclesiastes 7:25 to 29. And then, other more dealings on foolish authorities, the importance of fearing God, and the author concludes this with yung kanyang final conclusion and epilogue. Mababasa po natin ito sa Ecclesiastes 12 verses 8 to 14. So ano po ang sasalok po natin ng mga themes and messages po mula dito. Ecclesiastes dwells on the theme of the necessity of fearing and trusting God in a fallen and therefore frustrating as well as confusing world. Parang sa unang tingin actually, pwede natin sabihin na masyadong nega or pessimistic po yung pong Ecclesiastes. But it is also worth noting that Ecclesiastes also challenges the widely held notion that following God automatically guarantees a lifetime of material blessings. Kasi it points out the depressing reality that wicked people prosper while righteous people die in the prime of life. So ilang pong mga key themes na mababasa po natin is, first is yung pong tragic reality of the fall, yung pong sin as the root cause of all problems, then the vanity of life na napaka-meaningless po. The book begins and ends with the phrase vanity of vanities. So sa first chapter hanggang sa last chapter, the author is talking about vanity or meaninglessness of life. It also talks about sin and death. There is wisdom in recognizing man's rebellion against God. And then the joy and frustration of work. Na kahit na meaningless ang buhay, ay pwede namang enjoyin. The preacher recognizes that work is a God-given gift. And then, nag-shift po yung ating pong preacher, the grateful enjoyment of God's good gifts. Kahit na napaka-meaningless ang buhay, and frustrated po yung preacher, he still finds beauty in the world that God created. And he calls on his audience to delight in God's good gifts, katulad ng human relationships, food, drink, and satisfying labor. And then another theme is the fear of God. Na hindi fear na yung takot ka, but fear as in respect. A healthy respect and worship of God. Because of the fleeting nature of life and pleasure, the preacher calls on people to take refuge in God, whose work endures forever. So, ayan po. Yan po ang ating pong introduction to Ecclesiastes. At magpapatuloy po tayo sa ating pong next na session. So until then, let's continue to study Ecclesiastes and the Bible that Jesus read. God bless you and keep